All right. I am so happy to welcome back to the program. We have Mackenzie Greer with us here today. Thanks for joining me again, Mac.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Mel.
I love talking to Mac because fellow Cancer, like
Right. Can't beat
we
that.
we jive together. Um, so I think it's been a while since you've been on though. I feel like we did a forecast episode last time you were here. I don't remember which month, but it was probably something in early 2021. And then we did actually a while back, we did a program on astrology and palmistry. I think, which was a special episode because both Mac and I delve in palmistry, her a little bit more so, as that is part of your business. But that was a fascinating episode if you want to learn anything about palmistry, because I think we really got in there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. I think it's so cool that we share that together, too. It's just such a rarity to have astrologers that know about palmistry and to merge them together. I feel like we need more of us. So hopefully we cultivate some interests.
Yeah, this is your call. So if you want to if you want to learn about palmistry, if you want to join our special group of two, now I'm sure there's much more out there. I know Frank Clifford's one who is all
Oh,
about, yeah, he's got several books on palmistry, and actually I think one of my first books on palmistry, not the first, but one of those early ones was a Frank Clifford book. So there's another astrologer out there that is in the world of palmistry. But that being said, this has no segue to that. But that being said, I have Mac on here today to talk about Jupiter moving into Aries, which is big news in the skies. So we're going to dive all into that. But before we do so, if you haven't caught Mac on the program again or anywhere out in the interwebs, share a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Mackenzie Greer of Mac and the Zodiac. I'm pretty much a psychological astrologer these days. That's kind of where I found my footing as time has gone on. I've been practicing professionally since 2017, but Kepler College trained. Yeah, so I've been really just doing readings for people all through this pandemic times. And so if you're still looking for a reading, you're in the mood for getting up to date, come to me, come check it out. Or Mel, any astrologer, we're all super qualified these days. And yeah, other than that, also a palmistry teacher. I've been like teaching this year, which has been so fun. So if you've ever been interested in learning about palmistry, by the way, you don't have to have any esoteric background. You can just jump right in, and I'll show you the ropes. My next palmistry 101 class is going to be in September. So it'll be nice, kind of, right, just studious energy if you're feeling it. So that's me though.
That's you. That's great. So doing teaching the palmistry course, is that online? Can people learn all this? Oh, that's great.
Exactly. And it was a challenge too, right? Because when you're learning palmistry, it's like very tangible, it's very physical.
Yeah.
You gotta like learn how to touch a lot of things, engage things with the eye. But I've managed to do it and I'm happy with my students. So I think it's working out. So we'll keep chipping away at it.
Oh, fun. I want to be in that class. I need I know things and then I remember things, but it's always interesting that they see I don't know. I like personally I have never been taught palmistry with like a teacher in a real life setting. It's always been obviously reading Mars and Gemini, reading every single book on the subject, and then just seeing where it pans out and being like, give me your hand. Let's see. Oh, it works. Okay.
Right.
There's that. But it's always interesting to have like kind of the feedback of someone who knows what they're doing. So if you want to learn palmistry, Max your gal, September, jot that down.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, we got plenty to talk about here today with Jupiter moving into Aries, which is so interesting because it happens it happens at quite a time. It's like the ingress itself is on Tuesday, May 10th, but that day just happens to have Mercury going retrograde on the actual ingress day. Obviously, we're in between eclipses, it's smack dab in between the solar and the lunar eclipse. So to have such a prominent planet as Jupiter move over and into Aries, because Aries, as we know, is the first sign of the zodiac, according to who you talk to. And there's a potency that sits at cardinal points, what are known as like world points. So 0 degrees Aries is a really specific degree. So it's not just the ingress of Jupiter itself moving into Aries. There's something to be said about that kind of catalyzing degree of 0 degrees Aries. Yeah.
I
So
didn't realize there was so much going on the ingress day.
oh yeah, you looking at the chart.
Yeah.
Her eyes got big. She's like, whoa, what is happening here? Yeah, it's interesting. It's a big, I was calling it Fat Tuesday, big Fat Tuesday with Mercury going retrograde and Jupiter moving into Aries. And obviously the moon will be in Virgo then, which is it's actually not really quite configured to any of that, moving off a square with Mercury. But yeah, so I think it's going to lend a lot to kind of the eclipse energies that are coming with the lunar eclipse and Scorpio. I mean, these aren't Jupiter driven eclipses, but to have it is a Mars eclipse, and Jupiter will now be in Mars sign and sitting at the 0 degree point. So that does add this, I have a feeling we're going to be talking about a lot of new beginnings and new fresh energy, because that's just the idea of Aries there. But I'm going to give some technical data before we start to get in on some of the more specifics of just this configuration. So to get an idea of Jupiter's moves through Aries is that it kind of has this stop-start motion. It's a unique cycle, actually, where it's going to cross over the 0 degree point 3 times, where when I went back in history, because I only pulled it back so long, there's a lot of history. But since, the last couple times since the 70s, it's basically, there hasn't been that back and forth over the 0 degree point itself. It did a dance with Taurus and, 0 degrees Taurus, I think back in maybe, I can't remember if it's the 80s or 2010. I'm botching that one. But anyways, it has like this special kind of potency in my mind because it's going to dance over that point. Back to the technical data I said I was going to give. It enters on May 10th. It's going to retrograde on July 28th at 8 degrees of Aries. So it makes it to about 8 degrees. So if you have 8 degrees of cardinal signs, just check it. There's probably going to be a lot of Jupiter energy going there. It's going to cross back over the Aries point to go into Pisces on October 27th, 28th, around that time. It's going to station direct on November 23rd in Pisces to then re-enter Aries on that Aries point at December 20th, right before the solstice. And then it's going to just cruise on through Aries and exit May 16th, 2023. So we get plenty of these kind of back and forth tastes, pivoty tastes, as cardinal signs tend to be. So I think maybe where we should start is just talking about Jupiter as a planet. Let's get a feel for this archetype. So Mac, if I say, what's Jupiter to you? What would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great place to start, just as like a little refresher, right? Often we think of Jupiter as the greater benefic, right? It tends to be an influence that works positively. We view it positively because in our lives, Jupiter offers expansion, and we usually think more is better, bigger is better, right? And oftentimes, yeah, sure, it is. But we have to be very wary. And I especially think so with Jupiter and Aries is the fact that too much of a good thing is something we want to keep an eye on always with Jupiter, but especially in Aries in some dimensions that we'll begin to talk about a little bit later on. But really, for the most part, we like Jupiter. We love Jupiter. Jupiter brings us new opportunities. It gives us a reason to connect to things outside of our normal scope of life. It connects us to the universe. It connects us to social order in a lot of ways, right? It's very much about expansion and integration. So Jupiter is how we find our meaning in life, and also how we come to understand how it's all woven together, and at the same time provides us new opportunities, right? So when we're talking about Jupiter entering into Aries, we're talking about your Aries house for the most part, right? Where are you getting this kind of benefic Jupiter energy coming in, offering you some expansion, offering you some liberation at the same time, some just fresh opportunities, as well as, I think, understanding, which is a nice internal Jupiter, or rather internalized side of a Jupiter transit that doesn't get a lot of talk. Because I don't know if you find this, but right, oftentimes when astrologers talk about Jupiter, it's like, it's very externalized, like the benefits are externalized. This new opportunity will land on your doorstep. But oftentimes I think it's also like, I understand now, right? Or like, I get it, or that information has become integrated in a way that we heal from something, or we understand something better when we have a Jupiter transit through a certain house too. So I don't know if you relate with that on the kind of more quiet little side of Jupiter sometimes when it doesn't make a flashy entrance.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's just that's kind of the polarity of, Jupiter and Mercury as, opposites. It's like, we get the information, we get the stimulus, it comes in, but do we fully understand it? Do we fully integrate it? Does it become part of us? Does it become part of our philosophy, our belief system, what we can kind of trust and put our energies behind? And so I totally agree with you that is definitely a focus of Jupiter. And occasionally maybe that might be a focus of Jupiter more when it's in signs that are more receptive in nature, where, because a lot, Jupiter in Aries, when we have this kind of fire outward, we're probably going to see a lot that is more externalized. But yeah, absolutely. And that might be actually part of the Pisces that we just went through. And we're going to talk about this kind of, moving from Pisces to Aries, because that's a very important transition. But I feel like the Pisces transit was very much what you're describing, like just coming to points of understanding and a lot going on beneath the surface, because I feel like, we can't just grow externally. We have to grow internally in order for that to manifest, outside. I'm just doing waves outside of you. That's so yeah.
And overgrowth is dangerous too with Jupiter, right? That's why we always have Jupiter and Saturn working together to kind of say, like, this is the boundary. You can't overgrow this, or there's only so much capacity for growth in so many things, right? So,
well, I love that you bring that up, because it reminds me where I'm at with my plants right now. And so here we have this solar eclipse in Taurus that just happened, and my plants desperately need like propagating. They need, they're trying to grow more, but what's already there has grown so much that it can't nurture the other part. Like, there's only so much nutrients in the soil, and so like either what grows doesn't get enough nourishment, and the leaf isn't as bright, or it has like some dark spots, or or it doesn't grow as big because there's not enough like it's not focalized on what wants to grow and really blossom, because it's like partitioned with what it has. So I'm using a plant analogy in my desperate need to prune my plants right now. But yeah, I totally agree with that, because we can only handle so much.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's a great analogy. And it's so important to think about that. Like, where can I kind of cut back on my overgrowth? Where have I like bitten off more than I can chew is usually a Jupiter quandary, if you will. And I also wanted to mention too, that I think when in Jupiter transits, like in certain houses, right? Like we just had our Pisces house kind of have this Jupiter transit, and I'll have a little more of a dabble with that later in the year, as we'll talk about. But when Jupiter goes into Aries and our Aries house gets activated, we also get Jupiter's liberating energy, which I think is a really cool, just as a concept, a cool word, like liberation that Jupiter brings. And you think about Jupiter castrating Saturn, right? Like, and freeing all the other planets and being like, be free. Now I kind of think of that same, hopefully happier than castration energy going on in the Aries house, although it is Aries, who knows?
It is Aries.
There could be some cutting, right? But liberating whatever's kind of been stagnant or stuck in your Aries house, or what's looking to kind of get some fresh air, get some breathing room, just get some movement. So I kind of love thinking about it that way too.
Yeah. I mean, it makes total sense. Like, that's the idea of growth in some regards, is there's liberation to what was stagnant or stuck or wasn't having movement, because at the end of the day, Jupiter is about moving. It's like pushing something forward. I always reference it to, Jupiter's very prominent in death charts. It's like, what's the next chapter? And a lot of times with Jupiter energy, there is death of some sort. And that doesn't have to be literal death. It can be, but a lot of times, there is kind of that transitionary energy, because in order to grow and start new journeys and move into the next portion of the quest, something is left behind, because like you said earlier, you can't hold it all. You can't bite off more than you can chew, but you also can't carry everything on your back if you want to be able to fully engage and grow in what opportunities are before you. And that might be a lot about this Pisces Aries transition as well too. I feel like Pisces can have a lot of baggage to it to some extent. And that might be part of the process of moving on and fully understanding, like you were talking about earlier, bringing in these points of understanding and refreshing of our spiritual philosophies on life, so that we can really blossom into the new beginnings that want to start with the Aries energy. And so it's such an interesting, it's
Yeah. Good. I'm energized by the concept of it. I think it'll have its snags, but I'm intrigued.
I'm intrigued, to say the least here. And keep in mind, when I was talking about our technical data earlier, we are going to go through this transition a couple times. We're experiencing right now in the final days of Pisces, as this will be released a day before Jupiter goes into Aries. But you'll know where you've been. I mean, we always do, hopefully. And then we're going to touch on this again in the late part of October. Ironically enough, we're going to touch on this same transitionary energy between Pisces and Aries in our next set of eclipses. So it's really interesting to think about Jupiter just pushing us through the end and the beginning. Pushing us through the end to the beginning,
right,
in this eclipse, and then pulling us back in. It's like, oh, what haven't you dealt with? What didn't get fully wrapped up? To push us back in there once again with another set of really potent eclipses. And then get us right before the solstice to come back to Aries. So it's universe.
That's so tricky. And that's so funny, because I think when we were like kind of gearing up to talk about the transition between Pisces and Aries, right? I often visualize it as like Pisces as the kind of cosmic womb in a lot of ways, right? This kind of awareness of like there's no separation between, like when you're right, like a little creepy little fetus, you're just connected to your mother. There is no definition.
Creepy. When you're a creepy little fetus.
I'm supposed to be Cancerian and maternal. I'm working on it. When you're a creepy little fetus and you're connected to your mom, you feel no distinction, right? It's all love. It's all, well, hopefully. And then Aries is like the infant, right? It's like thrust out and you're in this hard, cold world. And then these concepts of survival and courage and raw, like crude life force that's kind of emerging with Aries, right? Well, it's kind of funny when you were talking about Jupiter going back and forth between Pisces and Aries. I'm like, oh, it's almost like the baby's getting sucked back in the womb and then it's going to spit out again. A lot of weird imagery going on here today, people. We're going to have to just deal with that.
Stay with it.
That's kind of what I'm like, what is this kind of, without it being too graphic, but like this kind of being pulled back into like almost cook more, or like we missed something and then being kind of spat back out in this kind of infantile state. Like, I just think it's a fascinating, right? And we all are kind of fascinated, I think, as astrologers by the end of Pisces and the beginning of Aries, because Pisces is the culmination. And Aries, of course, like you're saying, the 0-degree cardinal Aries point just being like this kind of launching, thrusting, literally the first degree of the whole entire zodiac. So it's such an interesting liminal space, and it's so death, life. Whoa, where are we going? We're right. I mean, really interesting. Like
it is when you think about it, it absolutely is. And I feel like really emphasizing what you just brought up there about the connectedness of Pisces and like being involved in the all of it, right? We think about Pisces, we kind of make hippie jokes of, oh, everyone is one, everyone is, actually, I can't think of it right now, but we're all one. That's what I was like. Right. We're all one. And when you're a creepy little fetus in your mom's body, we're one with that too. Right. But there's an individuation that happens with Aries, because then all of a sudden we realize, oh, we're an individual, we're a self, who am, I've been so immersed in the world and everything around me. And I mean, we have lived through an interesting time of collective considerations with pandemic life, and just the changing realities of the world, and warring factions. And there's just a lot going on. And I know that it's always been a big contention too with some of the energies that have been going on to move out of this space, is the idea of, are you aligning yourself with the collective and the needs of the collective? Or are you the individualist that only cares about what and I think Jupiter moving into Aries is going to remind us all that we are individual entities, and on our own journey, and where we have been within, the collective and engaging with everything that is, and we always will be, because we are part of the all. That is, these truths stand next to each other, but really seeding back into what it looks like as an individual entity when we've gone through so much, because we've all been reconfigured in so many ways. And now this is almost like a growth spurt for just individualism, in many ways, I think.
Right. I think I think that's such a fascinating point. And I'm so glad you brought it up. I think it'll be really interesting in terms of, I don't know where my mind is going here, but kind of thrust into individuation coming out of Pisces, and also how much emotional, you're kind of just talking about this before, but the emotional baggage of Pisces, and also taking on other people's emotional baggage, kind of just a nice reminder, me first, really quick. I got to establish me before I can take care of all of us, or you, or us, or we. Right. It's kind of just this reminder to come back to self on the positive spin. And then on the other kind of side, which I'm a little more kind of fearful of, is do we need more me first? And I think there's a healthy way to kind of cultivate that, or recheck in with yourself, if that imbalance is off. But when I step back and look at the collective, I'm do we really need more people saying well, what I believe is right? Oh God, no, no, no. But not that I want to only worry about that, but I am just I'm ooh, do we really need more people saying me first?
Well, and you stated this when we first got in there, is about how Jupiter can, in many ways, go overboard with things. So I think these are going to be realities of that we, are going to deal with. But I think that a lot of people that may need this boost of individual awareness, and to reconnect with themselves and what their purpose is here, and where we're going, in this fresh start energy, that is accessible. But we're going to get the over the top examples as well, because that's just the nature of the planet itself, and realize that, so we don't get caught up in it too. I think it's just don't get caught up in it. Don't get, we're moving from Jupiter in domicile to Jupiter ruled by Mars. It's do you want it to get your goat? Do you want to, where is your Martian energy? Where is your assertion? What triggers you into aggression, or irritation, and I always feel like irritation is such an interesting thing, because I feel like irritation is needed, because in order to grow, a lot of times we have to become irritated with where we're at, right, or what's not happening for us, or what we want to change. When we think about Jupiter, in the tarot, it's the wheel of fortune. It's literally the wheel of change turning. And so that's that growth and that movement here too. So I think that we might get fired up in many ways. It could be irritation from other people that are around it. So it could be irritation with ourselves. But I think irritation is going to be a real wisdom trigger, because we're going to know if we're fed up with something, or we it just, then something's got to change. Right. So I think that's a good barometer to kind of go by, especially at first.
And it's something to look forward to, because it's also so action oriented, right? You can do something. I think with this, especially you're mentioning with Jupiter dancing over the 0-degree Aries point, over and over again, it's it's not resting on your laurels. It's not taking any more BS. It's let me act, let me do something. I'm ready to kind of shake these cobwebs off. I'm not handling anymore. It's just go time in a lot of ways. And like really needing to choose your battles. I think pick your battles wisely.
Yes, because your battles can turn into wild, unpredictable.
Exactly,
Yeah.
little wildfires. I'm
And
also
remember that too, when you're engaging with other people in the world, everybody is under the influence of Jupiter and Aries. So if there was ever a time when you just don't want to, provoke in ways that are entirely unnecessary, I don't say go around like just acquiescing to everything and everybody in life, but just really choose, when the battle is worth it or facilitate some sort of ending, or not ending, but just something that is going to be of a positive nature for you in the end, and
definitely
not one that could be destructive
right.
or dangerous. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
those rams locking horns and getting stuck together. Just,
no,
no thanks. I'm
no.
curious. I wanted to ask you, like, how was your Jupiter and Pisces? How was your Jupiter Neptune? Like,
How was
how was all that for
Jupiter
you?
Neptune? It's so funny. It felt like there was, because the whole time Jupiter was in Pisces. And I mean, really, Jupiter's been in Pisces since late December. It did the similar thing where we got some tastes of it back in the summer of 2021. But the main meat of it was this like late December through the period that we're talking right now, with the highlight of Jupiter and Neptune meeting on April 12th. And it was interesting because it coincided with, Mars moving into that zone too. So it really just overloaded us. It was like, how much Pisces can you handle? How much Pisces are you able to swim through? And it had like a really lethargic feeling to it.
Yes.
But at the same time, I was really wrestling with direction and dreams, and like old dreams, and wondering if old dreams I have are coming up to be kind of catalyzed into new life and to have new confidence around them. But I wrestled with the doubt of whether or not they're supposed to be let go. And this was this was my personal kind of process. It's like, okay, well, I'm inspired by this. I still connect with this, but I've also had hardship and I've had grief around this too, as part of my journey through it. And so is there something still here for me? And I kind of need confidence to transcend that, and then put it into a new chapter? Or is it me just thinking that, seeing mirages and something that is really, I don't really have the energy for anymore? So I kind of had a back and forth with that. And for me, this is fifth house energy. So it had a lot to do with kind of the creative impulse and where I put my creative energy. But I also felt really creative at the same time too. I started doing these like reels on Instagram. I like when Jupiter was in a grand trine with my sun and my ascendant and Uranus. And so it had a lot of really creative energy to it, but it kind of culminated in this, is this plausible for me still? Or is this just a fantasy? And I
Yes.
really don't have a decision of either way at this point of that still.
Right. I almost wonder if you're not supposed to quite yet. I mean, maybe with some clarity, like once Jupiter moves into Aries.
Yeah.
I just want to say, like, I love that reflection. And I think like that a lot of people can relate to that sentiment, even if it's like your personal life. I think I just hearing what you said, like I feel so much of that, and just the reflection on like, is this still part of me? Or, and like you said, grieving over creative processes that have come and gone, or wanting to like tie them together, but maybe they're too far gone, or is it worth
Yeah.
bringing back, breathing life into? And I think we'll get that kind of nice boost with Aries to kind of see what's worth acting on, or what's worth kind of initiating, right? Because of the one key word with Aries seems to be like beginnings. It's all that kind of fresh, like that infantile energy, like let's go, let's create something new out of that kind of the emotional waters and collective feel all of it, kind of baggage of Pisces.
Yeah. And that's why we go through those big questions, and we have those kind of like soul searching questions where we go back and forth on, is because we have to assess these things within us and to know where to properly put our energy when the burst comes. And so I think that there will be some clarity that comes with that, just through what we're actually find ourselves energized by, right? Because we're talking about Mars, we're talking about Aries. And so you'll know the direction you need to go only because you're fired up about it. You have passion about it. You're enthused about it. So it's a clear sign just because you have energy for it. And if you don't have energy for it, when Jupiter is in Aries, then chances are that is your answer right there, because you would be fired up if you did. So
Exactly.
I think that's a big part of it. But what about you, Mac? How was your Jupiter and Pisces experience, or the Neptune activation?
I think as we were kind of talking about earlier, it was really kind of on the understanding side of Jupiter. It wasn't like externalized action. It wasn't like an abundance of opportunities or anything. It was in my eighth. So it's much more personal and kind of
Yeah.
quiet and reflective, and it was extremely healing in a lot of ways that it needed to be, in terms of just eighth house things that you just kind of got to move through. And it's a required transit. Sometimes you need some Jupiter energy to go through there and be like, okay, this is this. And you're like, oh, okay. I didn't realize that. Helps you kind of like greet your skeletons face to face.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, okay, hello. But really, all in all, it's been really good. I'm excited for it to go into Aries. I'm excited for some ninth house energy and just to
Oh
see what,
yeah.
right? Because the fire trines, let's go. It's
That's
time.
right.
I'm
So
looking forward to it.
teacher Max coming out,
Teacher Mac.
teacher Max.
Yeah, it should be fun. So
I think that will be fun. That's a great transit. I'll be working. I'll be sixth house
I
Mel.
was
And
thinking
like
about
what?
you getting your sixth house going. I was like, ooh.
Oh, well, my sixth house is also the ruler of my first house. So there's an integral part of, when you're Scorpio rising, you have that Mars shares with that first and that sixth. And,
Right.
like, I think I'll be pumped to be in good health and good physical form, but really feeling growth in my like daily routines. I think too about the sixth house of being a point of mastery. It's like you get the creative energy and vision in the fifth house, and that authentic message that just kind of like spurs up within you. But what do you do with that? Are you practicing that? Are you showing up to it every day? Are you putting it into motion? And so I think about the sixth house of being a point of self-mastery in many ways, and especially with the creative impulse. So it's like whatever I get out of this Jupiter and Pisces, it's like, okay, how am I going to put it into action and show up for it daily, and not burn out? Because,
Right.
Aries, as we were talking about before, it could go, especially Jupiter, and go overboard. So whatever house that, Jupiter is moving into in Aries, it's like, there is the realization, there is the potential for burnout, if you take it too far, too much. So I think that's something that, just a little caveat to put
Right.
in there.
I think that's so true. And especially because, right, they talk about Aries as like the match, right? It's like, whew, it goes up
Yeah.
fast, quick. And like you think about fire and energetically, that kind of force of fire, it burns with this quick enthusiasm, but it needs fuel. Otherwise it's going to run out, and it's kind of running on empty and it will die out. Right. So we have to kind of, especially with Aries, who is like notorious for, all let's go, let's start it. Right. It's a cardinal sign. It's about beginnings. It's about launching into new spaces. But then that match burns out, right? And it fizzles, or if it doesn't have that fuel, it's notorious for running out of stamina and follow through. It needs that consistency. So applying consistency and coming up every day without kind of lighting that match and just completely burning out super fast.
Yeah, because that can happen.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we don't want that. Um,
Mhm.
Now, one more thing I think we should talk about before kind of we're going to look into some like past transits of Jupiter and Aries, but thinking about the nature of cardinal signs in general, and them being movable signs that get things going. We've been talking about this initiating process and these new beginnings and these starts. But another thing that is key to cardinal energy is that it's pivot energy. And so we're probably going to see either ourselves or the people around us or the world do an about face, because that's essentially kind of where the energy goes. It's like it just turns, and we're in a different space. We have different motivations. We just, something's not working, and then you just turn. And so I think that's something to be, I don't want to say mindful for, but almost realize that it's okay to do that too. Because I feel like some people are like, I've stuck with something for so long, I can't just, like turn face now. But yeah, so any thoughts on pivot energy, Mac? Like that kind
I
of
mean,
cardinal, or just a cardinal energy in general? Like, what's your take on cardinal?
oh, I love it. Obviously, as cancers, it's great. I think it's just so action oriented. It just gives you like the push that you need to get things done, to get things moving. Um, and so, as someone who's like stimulated by change and also like scared of it, just like any other human, I'm like, okay, let's do it. Let's go. We could use some of that like fresh, just thrust of new energy and new starts. So I fully agree though. I think that it's good to be tuned into the fact that friends, families, even partners might just be suddenly like, you know what, I've been acting this way and no more. And especially with Aries, because it's just like, it's cutting, it's Mars,
Yeah.
I'm going this way and it's for me. And it's like, I respect that. And being able to respect that for other people, and then also being able to respect it in yourself, I think is going to be really important to be like, I need to do that as well in a certain area, because that's what Aries is about. It is about like courage. It's about survival. It's about that, right? This kind of, it has a lot of quick changing motivations or intentions at times, but it needs to kind of keep going and find what kind of brings you back to your center, because it's all ego at the end of the day. And hopefully we can use that in a constructive way. I think ego gets a bad
Yeah.
rap, but
Yeah, ego does get a bad rap, but we need it in order to engage with life and go after the things that we want in a healthy way. There are healthy versions of engaging with the self and the self's needs and wants and desires. And like that's where we need the ego. Otherwise, we would just be we'd lay down and do whatever anybody else tells us to do. And,
right.
we're not no one's doing that with Jupiter and Aries.
No more
It's like some
laying
people
down.
can surprise you that you're like, this person is always, just goes along with things. And then all of a sudden you're like, who are you stepping up and just stating your needs, saying, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Cause I feel like, Mars is a level of confidence. Aries has confidence, and Jupiter, as we said earlier, just going to ramp this up. So I think it's a cosmic confidence that might be kind of rushing in some ways. And like, I think that's going to be good if you needed that boost. But as we stated before, if you're not one who normally needs a boost of confidence, there could be overconfidence. And we just want to make sure you're not, overshooting the energy there. Now I will say, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the program about Jupiter's activations through Aries, but as we cross this first 0 degree point, it might take a little bit to get that energy going, because we still have Mars in Pisces. And so Mars has still got to go through some things, got to do an eclipse, but by the time we get to the end of the end of Mars, the end of May, and especially around May 29th, when we have the Mars Jupiter conjunction, that is going to be a lot of kind of what the things that we're talking about right now. And that, like, the strike of the match head, basically. At that point. So let's talk a little bit about past transits of Jupiter and Aries, because I think, as they say, there is there's wisdom in the past, know where you're coming from, know where you've been. So if I only drew it back so far, because obviously we have, Jupiter moves through the zodiac every about 12 to, 13 years, give or take, but usually about 12. And so depending on how old you are, of course, there's listeners of all age here. But the last time Jupiter was in Aries was in 2010, in 2011, early 2011, in 1999, in 1987, 88, and then 1975, 76. And so if you were born during those years, I know a lot of people that were born in 87, early 88, that have this Jupiter in Aries energy. And my former partner of 8 years was born in 75, and he had Jupiter in Aries. So I've become like very, I guess I'm aware of it in many ways, but so look back at those times in your life. I mean, Mac, does any of those years pop out for you? I know you'd be more 99 or 2010, 2011,
yes,
but
yeah, they do. 99. my parents had just kind of divorced. And so that for a big, Cancer life as it is, everything's transparent with me. In terms of that, all family dysfunction. Yeah. Like my parents divorced in 99. So that was like, oh, wow. Ninth house. Okay. This is a perspective shift in terms of like,
Yeah.
oh, life is very different. And then in 2010, I actually was going to school in the city and just like completely immersed myself in moving into the city, which is like my kind of thrust into being in my own new space. Both of them kind of coincided with moving, interestingly enough. But I do have a Mars ruled fourth house, and Mars rules my ninth. So perhaps there's some kind of Mars triggering going on there. So interesting. And so both kind of coincide with moving into new, kind of new spaces and new towns, new areas, and also just general, I was going to college and also just started going to kind of, just wow. Yeah, I have to reflect on it more coherently.
Yeah. She's like, do a little journaling around that, see what comes
Right?
up. Because
how about you though? Like,
yeah, it's like, because we have a growth story. I think that happens here always with Jupiter, but with the Aries activation, it's interesting as we've been talking about. But when I pull it back and think about, in 1999 and 2010 or early 2011, once again, there was kind of personalized activations in the space of like creative engagement. And what in 1999, I started finding a whole new group of friends in the music scene and being introduced to all this new music and kind of like underground nature, and finding my expression within that, which led to me living my daily life completely different than I used to, like just the things I would listen to, the people I would see, the concerts that I would go to, and just kind of like, nightlife and just engaging and just being a different person, I guess. Cause that's what I think with sixth house. I was talking about mastery earlier, but sixth house is like what our daily routine looks like and like who we are when we go through changes, like what we're doing from, sun up to sun down can totally change. And so it was almost like I was coming into myself more through these people that I met, through the things that I would buy. Jupiter rules the second house for me and the fifth house. So, these are creative spaces. This is my own creativity, my own self-expression. I started collecting records then, which became a continual passion. And so I started to obtain things and make things too that were aligned with like creative energy or making. I used to connect with people a lot during that time by making specialized mixtapes that were totally adorned, and like the tape itself would be painted or like have all these things glued to it, or like, back before there was any sort of like digital stuff, I'd be like scratching like scratch letters on it to like put the, so that was that. And then in 2010, 2011, that was another kind of creative awakening that was leading me to create music that I then took into my own bands that I would lead. And so that was the segue there. And I was actually in a band at that time where I was just kind of like a side player doing someone else's thing. But I had all this creative juice that I wanted to put towards my own endeavor. And so I had to leave that band. I had to make a sacrifice basically to leave that band in order to pursue my own thing, because I only had, at the end of the day, I only had so much time, like I'm working, I'm like, you got nightlife, you got, and also I became less enthused about that position because I was so engaged with what it was that I personally wanted to create and put my everyday energy into. So that's really what I see with my own.
How does that tie into now? Like, because I hear some of like the similar threads.
Yeah. It's like,
right, where you're like,
back.
oh, I have all these old creative things that are coming back from Jupiter's transit in Pisces. And are some of them worth activating? Like, can you see how it connects now?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think that there's always like a big kind of independent pull yourself up, and like my own creative spirit comes out during these periods and it relies on me to make decisions for myself and to show up for myself, and put energy behind what wants to like birth through me essentially, because I am a Mars ruled person. It's like, so having Jupiter in a Mars sign, and I got Mars and I just got Jupiter conjunct Mercury and Leo, in my 10th house. So it does add that bit of goals and achievement and what it is I want to produce in many ways. So I feel like I'm getting back to that. And it's like, I feel like I'm on the cusp of it. I know, but there's things in my life that have to change. There's things that I throw myself into every day where I'm a little hamster on a wheel right now, and it's
Right.
like, I need to kind of step off the wheel for a second to know. So I think there's going to be a recalibration process that will be happening for me personally.
Sounds good. Sounds
But
like a good
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, no, I think it will be. I think it will be good. I was around for 87, 88 too. I'm like, there's a, there's, that was right before I moved. When I moved to a different town for like the first time. But yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, I was in like a third, fourth grade at that time. That's a special time. And it's up. I was a little not like, I had some issues in third and fourth grade. Like I was a little sneaky.
A little
I had,
sneaky Scorpio
I was a
rising.
little, I was a little sneaky. I remember in fourth grade, we had this I don't know if this is Jupiter and Aries, the whole learning and kind of going about doing my own Mars thing. But I remember we had this like reading group where we'd all get together and we had this reading workbook, and every week we would have our assignment and then we'd have to grade. It was on the honor system to grade your assignment, and then the teacher would go around and be like, what was your score, what was your score, what was your score? And basically I had a report card that just came out. I had all A's. And then like a couple of weeks later, I go to the bathroom, the teacher looks at my workbook to see that there is nothing in it. And I had been faking it the whole time by saying, she'd be like, what's your score? And I'd be like, oh, 94. Oh, 98. 89. Like I'd like, I know I have to variate this and like make it look,
Right.
And so yeah, that was sneaky. I was a little sneaky I think I was too smart for my own good. I think. And so yeah, I don't know if that has anything to do with Jupiter and Aries, but that's a story that brings back.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Mars and Gemini problems.
That was Mars and Gemini problems. Absolutely. Well, and that's the thing too, is like we talk about Jupiter, it's like pull it back when we think about Jupiter's story. Look at where Jupiter, is in your chart. Look at what the houses that Jupiter rules. Jupiter is now going to be under Mars's domain. Look at your own Mars. Look at the house that Mars rules. What's your Mars story? What's your engagement with Mars energy and Aries energy in general? Because I think there will be some clues there too. So let's go on to these world events I went down a little wormhole for just around more of the Aries ingress part. Not, because obviously there's a lot that goes on in a whole year that Jupiter is in a sign. But here's the things that I just noticed in general. If I'm going to cap like an overall, thing, I noticed exploration. There was a lot of exploration that would happen. A lot of bombings and explosions, which, it's Aries. It's like that can happen, or attacks. These are it's Mars, it's Aries, it's warring energy. Power changes that would happen in various ways. There'd be power changes, which speaks to that pivot nature that we were talking about. A lot of times there was aviation related news for good or for not so good. And the first of long lasting things are released.
Wow.
And so I'm just going to run down. I'm going to run it down real quick and just throw things at you. But so in March of 1975, there was a big turn in the Vietnam War when the North Vietnam Army launched a campaign that ended up conquering much of a larger portion of South Vietnam, actually more than they thought they were going to take. They basically stunned and confused the enemy. So it was this win that they didn't even realize they're going to have such a big win, which is interesting to think about. It was the first ever same-sex marriage license to be issued in Boulder, Colorado. It was revoked later in April. It pivoted back, but it's the first of something that opened a door. uh Jaws first released then, which I thought, big
Great.
jaw, shark
Big,
energy.
yes.
There was a huge fire at the largest nuclear power plant at the world at that time, at Browns Ferry nuclear plant. So that was literally right around the ingress there. It was when Mariner 10 made the closest approach by an Earth vehicle to Mercury. And so these are the first times we got clear photos of the surface of Mercury. And at the same time, Helios 1 was made the closest approach to the sun ever by a man-made object. So here's our exploration energy that's happening there. It was also, when we talk about the Pisces to Aries switch, it was the end of the draft lottery for men that were 18 years old in America. So that whole kind of warring energy, like it's connected to war, basically ended there right before the entry. So right at the very end of Pisces, that had changed. And there were a couple of world leader assassinations at that time in Saudi Arabia and Zimbabwe. And also interesting, the president of Tunisia was named president for life right at this transit. But when it came back around to 1987, when Jupiter went back into Aries, it was actually revoked because there was evidence of his increasing dementia. So in that Jupiter cycle where he was named president for life, it was actually revoked right when Jupiter was moving into Aries the second time around. So that was 75. In March of 87, the first Starbucks opens, which is interesting when we think about Starbucks now and all the labor demands and the energy put behind trying to unionize it and stuff. There was a major earthquake in New Zealand right at the exact ingress. And spoiler alert, in June 2010, same thing. So I don't know if New Zealand has, if you're in New Zealand, just know that something about Jupiter and Aries seems to give some earthquake energy there. There was a hybrid solar eclipse around the same time, which was the same day as the largest recorded audience ever in attendance. So they're at WrestleMania 3. So there was this March 87 also had Jupiter coming in at the same time of eclipse energy, which is interesting to think about. Also, the best picture of the year, which won best picture at that time, was Platoon, which is a war movie, which is interesting. And unfortunately, there was a massacre in China of 19 unarmed Vietnamese refugees. So they kind of had that, that violent component. In February 99, there was in New York, there was an unarmed immigrant that was shot dead at that time, and it sparked a whole outrage throughout the city that kind of took this to the storm for like rights of, and firearms and police and, those types of things. Once again, King Hussein of Jordan dies of cancer. And so there was a change of power. There was also an assassination attempt on the Uzbekistan president, and also the assassination of an Iraqi Shiite cleric around those days. Kurdish rebels take over embassies across Europe. So we're seeing this kind of surge there. An avalanche in Austria destroyed a village around that time. But there's also new endurance records set for a hot air balloon trying to circumnavigate the world. And it was aloft for 233 hours and 55 minutes. So there were these, kind of Aries records born for hot air balloon.
Right. So Jupiter.
So Jupiter. And this is actually a little fun fact that they said was around this time, just interesting to think about, was Pluto actually moved further away from the sun than Neptune, because from 1979 to 1999, Pluto was actually closer to the sun than Neptune was because of its erratic, kind of orbit. And so it won't return there until 2231 again. But just a little fun fact, I was like, oh, so when I was born, Pluto was closer to us than Neptune. That's interesting. Oh. All right. And then the last year, as I'm inundating with all this stuff, in June 2010, when the ingress happened, it was the first 24-hour flight by a solar powered plane to be completed. And the plane was called Solar Impulse. Yeah, because we think about Aries too. This is the exaltation of the sun, right?
Right.
It was the first test Instagram post was made when Jupiter moved into Aries, and we know where Instagram is now.
Wow.
It was the first female prime minister to be sworn in Australia at that time. And it actually interesting, right after a couple months after the ingress in August, the World Health Organization declared that H1N1, which there was a pandemic of that, was over, saying worldwide flu activity had returned to typical seasonal patterns. So it was the end of a pandemic too. And I'm not saying like the pandemic's necessarily going away or anything like that, but it is interesting that that coincided with that ingress. But I mean, what do you think about that onslaught?
It was an incredible onslaught. I think it was so fascinating to reflect on all those. Thank you for compiling them. I don't even know, like,
Where to begin with that?
they're so perfect. Like, they're just great examples. And I think it really kind of just lends some, it lets your imagination kind of go, and hopefully not to too dark a place.
Yeah, we're not kind of, history remembers what it remembers because it, like, yeah.
Exactly.
So just keep that in mind.
I think those examples are just so good. I just think like the fact that all of like the transitions of power and just like the violence and the fires and the aviation and the hot air balloons, I'm like, what? It's just like perfect Jupiter stuff. And then also I thought about like Starbucks and just like Jupiter and Aries, just like over caffeinating, right? And just everyone's telling me like, Starbucks, like caffeinate, right? And the fact that they've populated the earth in such a Jupiterian,
yes,
like, wait, what a concept. I mean,
conquered.
Conquered. That's the way to think about it.
Yeah.
Just really interesting. And I think like one of the reflections I've had just thinking about Jupiter and Aries too is just like, thinking about how they merge together, right? We think about Aries separately, we think about Jupiter separately, and then we kind of marry them and merge them. It's so much masculinity, right?
Yeah.
Jupiter is a dry, yang, masculine sign, as is Aries, and they're both kind of concerned with phallic power in their own way. Like they're hyper masculine. So I like a kind of comical and maybe hopefully not so serious thought I had was like, oh God, great time for men's rights activists. Like, just like, you know what I mean? Like it's like, oh, it's very male centric. And it'll be really interesting to see where, like, in terms of what happens leadership wise, and just with obviously ongoing war all across the land, just like, where do we go from here? Like,
and that is a thing. That is absolutely a thing. And so, but I mean, think about it in your own life. Like maybe you're going to be exploring new chapters that you've never explored before, or reaching new heights that you've never reached. Maybe there'll be power changes in your own life where you become a boss of something, or the person that, the boss that you are, at your work is then changed to someone else, or goes into a different role, or someone else is brought in, or you introduce something to your own life that just becomes this lasting thing that's with you for a very long time. We can like,
right.
and be conscious of your plugs and where you put fire and things like that, knowing that, and like what Mac was saying earlier, and the battles that we choose to fight, just because there's more like that, just the energy everywhere. So,
right. Because you're merging like that impulsive energy of Aries with that really expansive, optimistic energy of Jupiter, right? So generally that's exciting. That's fun. We're going to like push forward into a lot of new arenas, but we just want to be mindful of not acting too quickly, not acting too impulsively, ending up with, half-baked thoughts or half-baked decisions that aren't fully panned out. Because remember, Jupiter it loves to step back and see that big picture, and not so great with the little nitty-gritty details of a plan. So we want to just like, while you're feeling excited and engaged with new concepts in your life, or especially in your Aries house, where you should be pushing that energy, you should be Jupitering, and you should let yourself come back to this kind of self-focalized place. Just be mindful that also with Aries, of course, that inherent polarity with Libra, we have the potential, I think, here to get a little lopsided in our collabs or our partnerships, because we're so self-focused that we're like, okay, oops. Well, there could be extra war in our partnerships, extra kind of, tug of war battles in our collaborations. We just want to make sure that we're not like over, self-aggrandizing is another Jupiter thing, or being self-righteous in terms of like, well, I'm right. So I think that'll be another interesting thing to kind of look out for too, energetically speaking, about this combination.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you got a great point there, just thinking about the other side of the pond with Libra there, because at the end of the day, Aries does interact with Libra, which we're going to actually talk about here in a second. Some of these activations that will happen with Jupiter and Aries, but it is there, there's the I, but with the I, there's always the we are not no man is an island. So, and that's an interesting thing to think about too, because, some of the best relationship, a lot of relationships that last and stand the test of time and are able to grow through conflict. And so this is the thing, is like, you are who you are and you do what you want to do, but we might come up against other people that way. And it's like, how are we going to grow through that? By occasionally having to stick up for ourselves, occasionally realizing that maybe we are lost in our own world and our own needs, and we do have to consider others because we have stretched the line or gone a little overboard there. So I just think there's just going to be conflict in general, because conflict helps us grow, but only when we engage in it responsibly, and it has result, and we lean towards results that benefit us and the people that we are engaging with, rather than just running roughshod over everything and just being like, it's my world, I only care about me. So I think that's a great point to bring up, Mac. So let's go into some of these, into our last kind of segment here about the major Jupiter activations that will be taking place in Aries. So if you're watching the video, we're going to share the screen and share some of the charts here. And so you'll see the day here on May 10th when Jupiter moves into Aries. It's interesting too, because right when the sun is approaching a conjunction with the North Node, which is always very illuminating. Obviously we see Mercury retrograde here and stuff. So that this is the chart for the actual ingress. My mic has a mind of its own today. And so the first major, okay, so here's the thing. I think it is going to be major when Mars actually moves in to Aries, because that is going to Martianize our Jupiter. Look at that. When Mars moves into Aries, the moon is exactly on it, like at the same time. Basically, the moon is sandwiched between Mars and Jupiter on May 24th, on Tuesday. So just if you want a taste of what
right,
there it is. There's a healthy, juicy taste for you. So that will definitely put some Aries into our drinks there. But I think that the first one we're really going to feel is going to be this Mars Jupiter conjunction, which happens on May 29th, because this is a whole new cycle starting between effort, energy, expansion, moving forward. But it's also Mars in its domicile with, large and in charge with Jupiter on it. So any thoughts about this configuration, Mac, on Sunday, May 29th, give or take, this is going to be an influence all the end of May.
Exactly. Well, I think really what stands out to me, like conceptually from where I sit, is the fact that, like, I agree, Mars being in Pisces kind of just like slowing down that fresh Jupiter energy at first, but once it launches in, it's kind of like it's all in, the cards are on the table, right? And I think what's really important to keep in mind about Jupiter's transit through Aries predominantly is the fact that it's answering to Mars. So when Mars is in Aries, we get that really turned up perspective on Jupiter and Aries. And then also, not to mention when Mars moves into Taurus, when it's in its detriment, and how that might slow down some of your Jupiter and Aries plans, or make you kind of rework or just kind of ground down again. There's constructive ways to utilize it. And then even looking even further without trying to overload, but the fact that Mars goes into Gemini for a bajillion years, and it has,
I know,
right? And it goes retrograde like around the same week when Jupiter dips back into Pisces too. So it's like this really funny, like push and pull kind of thing going on there. But just generally speaking, I think when Mars is in Aries, this is going to be like the go time, the push. This is when you can kind of break out of those ruts, right? When you can really utilize that fresh, unhindered Jupiter and Aries energy, because, Jupiter can do a lot when it's uninterrupted. And the one thing I kind of noted about its full stay in Aries throughout, the year off and on, is the fact that like it's almost like classic Aries, because Jupiter's kind of on a solo mission during its stay in the sign. Like, at least in the first stretch, like it's not interacting with Saturn. It's not interacting with Neptune. It's not interacting with Pluto or Uranus. Like, it is, it's very classic Aries. It's, it's interacting with the inner planets, and, later in the year, it starts to dabble with everybody else when it gets later into the degrees, but it's kind of just like, I'm over here. I got my blinders on, right? And I thought that was a really funny thing. I don't know if you noticed that too, where it's just like, I'm kind of on my own here, and I've got to like do something with this energy.
Yeah, it reminds me of like a horse with the blinders, basically. It's just like, it's just focused. It's on this. It's like the world's moving around you. There's other, but it is hyper focused there, with not too much. Like you said, there's not too much, I guess I could say, interference or blending of energies. It gets very pure. But like you said, following where Mars is going to be super important. And the fact that we engage with a horrifically, I don't know if that's the right word, long Mars retrograde, or Mars in Gemini, basically, because that's going to be like a 7-month, I think, total of Mars in Gemini. And I have Mars in Gemini, and I'm like, no. It is my 8th house, though.
You don't want it in your 8th. That's what I was going to say.
Oh, no, I'm going to be an 8th house perfection year too. I'm like,
it's in my 11th. I'm like, I want to sever my community. I want to sever my friends. All right, let's go. Hopefully not.
Yeah. So get acquainted with your Gemini house too coming up, because
it's going to be funneling through that.
Yes.
It's going to be funneling whatever the Jupiter and Aries, wherever your Aries house is getting fed through that arena. Whatever that story is, it's for, when we get there at that point in time, not quite yet, but
yes, but keep that in your back pocket, especially when you have big plans. So that is definitely going to be one of our first big activations there. Now, like Mac was saying, it's kind of doing its own thing for quite some time. And really the next kind of big shot of Jupiter juice in my mind, other than Mars, I love that you point out Mars and like just what Mars is doing, because Jupiter is a side effect to the Mars, especially during the late summer or at late July, early August, when Mars is going to be conjunct Uranus on the North Node. I have a feeling Jupiter is going to be like, oh, what? There's all this, you're bringing me down to earth. All of a sudden I have to have like these considerations of like surprise, like physical, elements or endurance. It's one thing to be inspired and have great, like passion and focus, but what about when you have to do things that are here and now, or you have to change something about your comfortable self that requires that? So just know that late July, early August in itself is interesting, but Jupiter will be a bystanding component because of rulership, because of those configurations. That being said, though, one of the next big points of Jupiter juice in my mind is going to be the new moon in Libra on Sunday, September 25th, 2022. And that is when, so basically the sun and moon conjunct at 2 degrees of Libra are going to be in opposition to Jupiter, who will be retrograde at that point. And so so when you were talking about earlier, this I versus we energy, or, who we are together, who I am and my mission is as, alone. I think there is going to be some, Pluto, or Mercury's retrograde again during the Jupiter activation here. There's a lot of Mercury retrograde in the Jupiter's activation. So there's something to be said about that as well. Trining Pluto. Any thoughts that come up with this configuration?
Really, like, primarily just the fact that I mean, I think it's just going to really touch on that lopsidedness, or where you've gone overboard and just like not catering to yourself and what you need or what your plans are, and then where you've been catering or compromising too much in terms of partnership, and then like the reversal of that, right? And just when you've been over prioritizing yourself, and not your partnership or your collaborations, and not just platonically, but I'm sorry, not just romantically, but business wise,
Yeah.
collabs, anything, any one-on-one contact. So I think this will really kind of just illuminate, like, where does that story lie at this point with Jupiter, really kind of settled in at this point. It is retrograding and preparing to kind of back into Pisces in a couple of months. But at this point, it'll be like a nice just moment to stop and be like, okay, what's going on, and double check. And of course, it'll be Libra season at that point. So really kind of just rebalancing the scales of me versus we, right? And kind of seeing what comes up in that arena.
Yeah. So that's a Jupiter is going to, I feel like Jupiter is going to remember that there's other people.
Yeah.
Jupiter might realize that, oh, wow, in order to do this, I need help.
Right.
I need a little help. Mars is in Gemini, then, slowing down, but trining Saturn, which is interesting too. So there is that, kind of long-term goal energy, what we're putting our thoughts and ideas and energy into for the long term there. And so it feels like, because when Jupiter, because essentially we have the sun opposing Jupiter then in that retrograde period, that's when it's the closest to the earth too. So we're going to feel Jupiter more acutely even then as well, because it's more physically more close to us too. So that will absolutely be a turning point.
Right.
Now we've got some time once again. I already stated the kind of like when Jupiter gets to, this is where is that? Oh, I jumped ahead in my timeline. This that I find very interesting is actually, so it's interesting that's the sun's relationship with Jupiter, because here we are talking about the sun opposition to Jupiter. And then the next kind of big activation is, around December 21st, when Jupiter is at the 0 degree point again, back in Aries, and the sun is having its Capricorn solstice moment and squaring Jupiter at the same time. So here we have this solstice chart being set up that is, that Capricorn meets Aries. There's malefic backed energies that are going head to head in some way. So this is an interesting solstice moment. Any thoughts, Mac, on Sun Jupiter square?
Yeah, I think collectively that, like, on a global level, this will be really interesting. I don't know if I want to like decipher what it means.
Yeah.
I think it's probably more fun to think on an individual level, but this I think is definitely going to be important.
World.
On a
Yeah, I agree.
scale.
I agree.
I think individually speaking, this of course is when there's kind of like a clash between like, what are we contributing to society? What are we kind of pushing forward in our career, our reputation? What are we striving to kind of bring to the table? And then Jupiter in Aries being like, this is just like, a dream, like just a little dream and a plan that I want to bring to life, right? It's all mine. It's like these Jupiter and Aries is like, this plan is my baby, right? Like this vision I have is my baby, or thing that I want to do for myself, this choice I'm making for myself, this reifying me-ifying that I'm doing with Jupiter and Aries kind of clashes against like, okay, well, how are you contributing to society? Is this plan working? Is this functional? How are you contributing to like, the larger social sphere, at large, just the kind of little clash between like the vision and the kind of impetus, I think, to get it done in a lot of ways. And when you look at that, what do you think?
I feel the same things. I definitely feel that the world stage is going to be very activated at this time. It's just like, how could it not? And when we talk about those kind of shifts in power that I was talking about earlier, and just there's probably going to be dynamic power shifts that take place, whether that is in governments, or it's in corporate entities, or there just seems like there is going to be, and they could be grasps. I mean, squares are conflict by nature. Oppositions are obviously, but there's just turning points that happen with squares, and and a lot of times there's no ability to cooperate with it, because it has to be one or the other thing. Like it's like, it's like that forked path, basically, squares in many ways. It's like, you got to go one direction or the other. And so I feel like it's going to be a big pivot point, power wise. But yeah, in your own life, it's like, yeah, we get to the point of Capricorn season and we get very connected with what are our goals? What are our ambitions? What am I bringing to the world? What am I wanting to achieve with my life? Have I achieved this thing that I've been baking, this cake I've been baking in Jupiter in Aries time? Because now Jupiter's back, right? It dropped. I don't want to say it dropped its baggage in Pisces, but it just did do some wrapping up of some things that were maybe left behind that hadn't been dealt with yet. And so to have Jupiter fresh and back in, and then it's kind of like this not contention, but because squares are very activating too. So it could be activating like, okay, I'm back with my Jupiter and Aries mission, but what's the plan? How am I going to see this through? How am I going to architect this space and get closer with it? Because Mars is retrograde in Gemini, and still there. So it's not like we are like moving forward like crazy at this time. Mars retrograde. A lot of times we have to hang back and deal with, sometimes frustrating backtracking or just behind the scenes planning or regenerating our energy in order to get there. And that could be the tension too, is maybe we want to rock it off, we're ready to start, but we don't have the energy, or something's getting in the way, or we don't have the plan, or we don't have the full ideas, we haven't learned everything we need to yet. Gemini energy.
That's the Gemini concept. It's like it could be kind of coming back to the details of things, or like what have we missed, or what information has kind of slipped through the cracks that we've allowed that in our big kind of grandiose plans. Where have we kind of missed some messages, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, just looking at this and know what's coming too, is that Mercury is about to retrograde on Pluto. You don't see it in this chart right now, but it is coming. So that's a lot to think about too, because when we think about planetary chains, we got Mercury backing that Mars retrograde in Gemini, which is, talking to Jupiter. And so we're going to have this big old chain at the end of the year, which should be interesting. That could be activated by this Sun Jupiter moment. But then still send us into all this retrograde energy that needs to be dealt with, that can bring up some big things that haven't been, in order for those fresh starts. But so then that kind of brings us really to March and April of 2023, because obviously we're going to be getting back into, we're going to be getting back to Aries. We have March 11th. That's when Jupiter is going to, this is kind of the succession of things. So first we have, where's my, get this all lined up. Oh, no, that's not what I'm looking for. So first we're going to have, what? Wait. Did I do this wrong? So first we're going to have, I think Venus is going to conjunct Jupiter, right? I feel like this is, So March 1st, 2023, we got Venus coming around to Aries and is going to conjunct Jupiter and Chiron basically at the same time. So we have this Venus Jupiter moment that is embedded with Chiron, which Jupiter will then conjunct Chiron on March 11th. So basically the first half of March kind of has this Venus Jupiter Chiron signature in it. And so any thoughts about that, Mac?
Understanding the pain of love, understanding I think that I think it's probably going to be a more reflective Jupiter situation, because I think Chiron and Venus, when they're together, are so visceral, they're so relationship oriented. It's so much about our self-worth and where our pain lies. And then you put it in Aries and it's in me. And then hopefully Jupiter can shine, on a more psychological level, just shine some insight or some understanding or some integration around those themes, potentially, especially around relationship wounding and sticking up for yourself in relationships, or defending your needs or demanding your needs if need be. And that's kind of just where my brain goes typically.
Yeah. Well, and that it's a good thing to point that out too, because really, we're talking about March of 2023, but here in a couple weeks, or when this comes out in a week's time, we're going to have that lunar eclipse in Scorpio, which will also have Venus on Chiron at that time. So if you want a precursor of what Venus Chiron looks like for you in Aries, this lunar eclipse is going to bring it. And then, And then sometimes, these can bring things up that then when Jupiter comes around, and what Mac was talking about early in the program, the understanding component, like maybe we fully can understand and gain the, because we know Chiron is like triggers us. So there's wounds, but there's also wisdom to be gained from that. So to have Jupiter on top of Chiron too, it seems like an extra wisdom boost.
Yes.
Even though we might go through things that could be painful or interact with, just kind of rile things up within us. And when I think about Venus and Aries, I really think about the component of self-love. And that has to translate to partnerships. We got to love ourselves to be in right partnerships. I mean, not completely, it doesn't mean you can't be in a relationship if you don't fully love yourself. I mean, we all, like, plenty of us are in relationships and we still struggle with self-love, but there is a balance there. And if there are struggles of self-love within someone, I feel like the Chiron component can bring it up. And then Jupiter hopefully can help, and it might ramp it up. Remember, we talked about Jupiter really ramping up, but hopefully there is that understanding, that integration, that moving beyond it, right? Growing from it rather than it just happening and then we just move on with life, like we actually get something from it. So I think that's, I think that will be potent there. So kind of the next thing that happens after that is the sun will start its conjunction with Jupiter, a sun Jupiter cycle, basically that is seated in Aries. And that's going to happen April 11th, 2023. So this is our shot of like exalted solar energy into Jupiter. Mars has finally moved along. It's in Cancer now, and not its best place, but it's not in Gemini.
Right.
And so any thoughts about a solar Jupiter conjunction?
I think like if this was the moment you were waiting for to like this could be like a real lift off moment, just really pushing it forward, really kind of getting it going, right? We have Mars kind of moving on from its story. We also have a whole bunch of other seeds being planted in terms of major shifts that are kind of undergoing. And I just realized that these are also happening during Jupiter and Aries, right? Like we have Saturn going into Pisces,
Yeah.
Pluto in Aquarius.
Aquarius, yeah.
Massive societal, just get life stuff, like major shifts going on. And so it's like, if you don't have to ask for change. It'll come to your doorstep with this. And especially with the Aries energy and the Sun Jupiter conjunction, it's just like, all right, I see the plan. Let's do it. Let's seed it down to like everything is kind of shifting, especially in those houses. I mean, it's just wild to consider that that's all happening in March.
Yeah, no, that's so basically March and early April. So we get that Venus, Jupiter, Chiron we talked about. Then we get, I skipped the gun with Mercury there. Mercury is going to conjunct Jupiter around late March. And then a couple of weeks later, we have that solar activation. And like you said, like here we have Pluto moving into Aquarius on March 23rd there. So, and getting close to the bending of the nodes, but that's a podcast in itself. But March and April of next year, when does Saturn move into? So Saturn moves into, March.
March.
I'm like, whew, give me a
March,
fan.
March
I'm like, March 2023, Saturn moving into Pisces, Pluto moving into Aquarius, these Aries, Jupiter and Aries activations. So, yeah.
I think this is where you really get to like push forward, or it's like whatever Jupiter's been trying to free up or liberate or expand in your Aries house, like when all these other shifts kind of coincide, it starts to just really relay the foundation and recreate the terrain in a new capacity. So it's like, this is new terrain. And if you talk about Aries being pioneering and you want new beginnings, then look no further, my friends.
This is it. This is the big shift. Oh man. Well, Mac, geez, I forgot about that one. In all my prep, I forgot about those very important details there. So that's kind of the highlight of Jupiter in Aries there. I guess it goes out with a bang, so to speak. But that being said, if I like to put on the spot, if you had a keyword to recap the nature of Jupiter and Aries, what would it be?
I say horsepower. I think it's
Horsepower.
let's go. Rev it up. Like you try to use it positively. Don't overblow it. Try not to bite off more than you can chew. Do lean into that energized newness, the freshness of it all. Take on new projects, be brave, be courageous. But also it's a little survival instincty. So I'm just really curious to see how it plays out on the world stage, and hopefully it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the survival instinct. It seems right, because when you're moving into new territory and everything's moving into new territory around you, like you don't know. That's the whole idea of instinct, is like instinct brings you through something that is totally fresh to you, because you don't have anything to rely on back other than your animal instincts that are like, oh, do this, go there, turn left, turn right, yeah. So it's I guess I'll piggyback with instinct. It's like, just follow your instincts, but also, like, just be aware of what's too much. Sagittarius, the card is temperance. It's like, there's moderation can be our friend. We can still like propel into new territory and exceed our heights more than we've ever been before. But we can, it doesn't have to be like too like just all or nothing, or like just explode there, because you can just you can blow your load, so to speak.
Beautiful. Nice. There's a nice phallic energy.
You know how to get it in there. I could let that go. So yeah, so don't blow your load. but definitely go into new territory, put on your hiking boots and be ready for your hot air balloon ride.
Yeah. Bring a sword.
Bring a sword. Bring a sword. Bring a fire blower. All right, Mac. Well, I think we covered as much as we can of Jupiter and Aries, and we just have to live it now at this point. See where we end up with that. So before we go here, where can people find you? What do you got going on?
Yeah, so you can find me at macandthezodiac.com. It's MACK and thezodiac.com. Really just teaching a palmistry 2 course in June. So you already have to be in palmistry 1 for palmistry 2, so you can't join that. But I'm just letting you know that there's future classes for palmistry, right? Starting in September. I haven't had a chosen date, but going to be September. If you want to come join in, again, you need no esoteric background. You can just hop right in and learn how to read hands. It'll be super cool. And also you can just come by for a reading if need be. So I'll always be here for you.
That's right. Go see Mac. Go get that Mac attack. I'm like, is that a McDonald's reference? I'm like,
It's
oh, Mel. All right. All right. So, of course, I will share Mac's information over at my website at energeticprinciples.com, where you can book a consultation with me if you like. You can also find me on Instagram at energetic principles. See what's going on over there. What else do I have? My newsletter, The Heavenly Wind, comes out once a month at the beginning of the month, and May just arrived in the inboxes. So if you want to get that sent to you, come on over, sign up. It's free. I only send 1 email. You get 1 email a month. I have no more in me to give than that. So don't worry about an influx, because I don't have it in me. But come on over, sign up for that. Share this podcast. We come on to share this information so that it gets spread widely to others. So sharing is caring. Share it with a friend, share it on your social media page, whatever feels right and authentic to you is good. Leave a review where you listen to this podcast, because it helps it be boosted in the ratings and more searchable. And yeah, I mean, I'm excited for this transit. I'm a little nervous, but I'm also excited. And I'm so glad you got to come share with this space with me today, Mac, and talk all about it.
Oh, it was the best. Thank you for having me. I super appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. And all right, everyone out there, are you ready? Are you ready for Jupiter and Aries? Whew, yeah, I'm gonna take a nap while you can. Get your naps in. And we wish you the best as we rocket into this new territory. So, all right, everyone. Good luck out there. And as always, may the stars be with you.